Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are cracking open a seriously foundational text, Matthew chapter 1. We're going to unpack two distinct but actually deeply connected themes here. First, a sweeping royal genealogy, and second, the highly miraculous events surrounding one single birth. The text really sets out to reveal that Jesus is the long-awaited Messiah, fulfilling these massive ancient promises. It's a completely fascinating narrative to uncover. So, let's just jump right in.
Okay, let's dive into this. How exactly does a centuries-old family tree set the stage for history's most famous birth? I know it's super easy to just gloss over a long list of names, but this ancient family tree, it's there for a very specific reason. It's literally setting the stage. We're immediately introduced to these dual themes. You've got the heavy weight of royal history on one hand, and then this sudden, miraculous spark of a totally new beginning on the other. The author doesn't just want to tell us a birth story, right? They want to ground the whole thing in an ancient, ongoing narrative.
Which brings us to part 1, the royal genealogy.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer scale of the history we're looking at. The family line begins way back in the ancient era. We're talking foundational figures here: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Judah. Then we skip centuries ahead and arrive at King David. And wow, this is where a massive theological anchor is dropped into the text. God had promised David that one of his descendants would reign forever. That's the huge promise hanging over this entire lineage. Finally, the timeline sweeps us all the way down to the 1st century, reaching Joseph, who is introduced simply as the husband of Mary.
Now, the text presents a really fascinating legal and familial dynamic here. Joseph wasn't Jesus' biological father, but his presence at the end of this huge genealogical list is absolutely critical. You see, by becoming the legal father, Joseph essentially passes on the rightful inheritance of David's royal line. Through Joseph, that ancient historical promise made to David is legally transferred to Jesus. It secures his status in this royal lineage, completely bypassing the need for a biological connection to Joseph. It's a really clever legal mechanism.
Moving right along to part 2, a miraculous pregnancy and the human dilemma.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the stark contrast we see. On one side, you have this completely normal, traditional expectation, right? Mary and Joseph are engaged to be married, standard human procedure. But then, suddenly, that traditional path is just totally shattered. Before they're even married, Mary becomes pregnant, and the text claims this happens through the power of the Holy Spirit. So we literally have the ordinary colliding head-on with the extraordinary, which obviously leaves the human characters in a state of profound confusion.
And that brings us to the human reaction, specifically Joseph's reaction. He's got a really tough choice to make here. The source describes him as a righteous man. So, faced with an unexplained pregnancy that he knows for a fact isn't his doing, his immediate instinct isn't vengeance, it's not public outrage. Instead, he makes this incredibly difficult, quiet decision to just end the engagement. The text tells us he wanted to avoid disgracing her. It's actually a moment of deep empathy in the narrative. He's just a guy trying to do the right thing in an impossible situation, choosing a quiet exit over a massive public scandal.
But then everything changes in part 3, the angelic message. Out of nowhere, an angel of the Lord appears to Joseph, and this happens while he's sleeping in a dream. Just imagine the narrative tension here for a second. Joseph has made his agonizing decision, he finally goes to sleep, and suddenly the divine just breaks right into his subconscious, and it delivers a message that, according to this text, will literally alter the course of the universe.
The angel tells him, and I quote, "Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife. The child within her was conceived by the Holy Spirit." Now, notice right at the beginning how the angel addresses him, son of David. The messenger is intentionally reminding Joseph of that massive royal genealogy we were just talking about. It's a reassurance. The angel is basically confirming to Joseph that this shocking pregnancy isn't some awful betrayal, but actually a direct act of the Holy Spirit. He's urging him to cast aside his fear and go ahead with the marriage. The angel then gives a very specific instruction that links a name to a mission. You shall call his name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. So the crucial point is that the text isn't just handing out a name here, it's defining the child's entire purpose. The name Jesus itself is intrinsically tied to this stated mission of salvation. Honestly, this single sentence perfectly encapsulates the core theology that the Gospel of Matthew is setting out to present to us. Let's move to part 4 and see how this builds into ancient prophecy fulfilled.
At this point, Matthew kind of steps in as the narrator and makes a really bold claim. He states that this entire miraculous event is actually the direct fulfillment of an ancient prophecy, and he quotes the prophet Isaiah. "Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel." So the text is actively weaving this new first-century event right into a promise that was made centuries beforehand. It's aiming to prove to the reader that this whole thing is part of a grand, orchestrated design.
And we absolutely have to define that ancient term for a second. Emmanuel literally translates to God with us. This short little phrase perfectly encapsulates the overarching theology of the source material. The claim being made here isn't just that some special human king is being born. No, it's that the divine is actually entering the human timeline. God with us, that is the ultimate resolution the text is pointing toward through this miraculous birth.
Which leads us nicely into part 5, faith and obedience. The resolution here is remarkably straightforward, and it's completely defined by Joseph's immediate response. Step 1. Upon waking up, he totally abandons his plan to walk away and takes Mary as his wife. Step 2. The child is born. And step 3. Joseph legally adopts the child by naming him Jesus, effectively cementing that royal lineage. He follows the angel's instructions absolutely to the letter, no hesitation.
So, to pull all of this together, there are 3 massive takeaways we need to look at. First, the text strongly argues that God keeps his promises across generations, linking Abraham and David directly down to this very moment. Second, Jesus is presented as the ultimate fulfillment of both that royal lineage and the divine prophecy. And third, and I think this is so cool, on a profoundly human level, it shows how quiet, faithful obedience can play a crucial role in a much larger divine plan, even when there are just overwhelming personal complications.
Which leaves us with this final, kind of mind-bending thought. If this single chapter effectively bridges centuries of ancient history with such an unprecedented new beginning, how does it alter our view of all the history that followed? Because this setup, it changes literally everything for the rest of the narrative. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time.